everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. All right. My guest today is Kunal Singh is, I think, right now a PhD doctoral student. And today, interestingly, this is a new experiment on the Cārvāka podcast. We are going to discuss the PhD dissertation. Obviously, Kunal had written the dissertation. It is called Unmaking the Bomb Strategies of Counterproliferation. Kunal, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Kushal, for having me.
So, Kunal, this is your first time on the podcast. So, I'll request you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, about your background, and then maybe we can take it forward from there.
Great. Yeah. So, as you have already said, that I'm a PhD candidate at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I do security studies. So, there's a security studies program. I'm right now in my fourth year. So, the dissertation you're talking about is still in development. So, it's not final. It will take some time. So I'm interested in mostly politics of nuclear weapons and South Asian security and issues in general, all international security issues. And yeah, before this, I was in India. I was a journalist with Hindustan Times. Before that, I was with Mint. I have worked at Center for Policy Research, and uh, and in previous life, I was an engineer, a materials engineer from IIT Kharagpur. So that pretty much sums up.
ये आईआईटी खड़गपुर से जर्नलिज्म में जाने का जरा राज समझाओ कि किसी को
Uh, so the short answer, there is a longer answer, but the short answer is I was reminded of this, the Urdu sher of Allama Iqbal. वतन की फिक्र कर नादा मुसीबत आने वाली है तेरी बर्बादी के मशवरे आसमानों में ना समझोगे तुम मिट जाओगे हिंदुस्तान वालों तुम्हारी दास्ता तक न रहेगी दास्तानों में
got it, that's a fair assessment. So, कुणाल एक काम ऐसे करते हैं. Counter proliferation is a complex subject. मुझे भी आपकी जब you shared your dissertation, you were nice enough to share it with me. I tried to read it. मुझे भी थोड़ा समय लगा. वो कुछ terminologies होती है वो बार बार जाके गूगल करना पड़ता है इस terminology का अंतर मतलब क्या होता है मतलब. So it's a complex subject. So maybe we can start like this. Can you take us back a little bit and look at the history and then maybe come to the current scenario or in the last few years ka scenario? Maybe we can start with the history itself.
so history I mean, you mean history of theory building about nuclear weapons?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did this theory building come up, and why did counterproliferation as an idea itself exist?
So, first of all, counter-proliferation as an idea exists because nuclear weapons are pretty important. Any new state which gets acquires nuclear weapons becomes an important matter in international security, and there are other states which do not want to that this club of nuclear countries increase for various reasons. There can be security reasons, there can be prestige reasons that this is an exclusive club. Let's maintain the prestige of that exclusiveness. So. But but thinking about why I guess nuclear going behind a little why nuclear weapons are special. So, once first they get used in 1945 at the end of the World War II, and after that actually people start theorizing about nuclear weapons. What is it about it that makes it so special? And Brody writes a lot in that period. Then Schelling comes in, and there are a lot of people theorizing about it. Brody says from now on, militaries are not going to strategize about how to win a war, but they are going to strategize about how to prevent a war, because wars, when they will happen, will be very destructive because of nuclear weapons. So the first thing that everybody knows and that becomes implicit in this statement is the scale of destruction, and just the sheer scale of destruction is used. But even before the new atom bomb was used in on Japan, a lot of destruction had already happened. So some people begin to ask, like, what is new about it? Destructions, fire bombing, and everything. All of it was already happening. So the second thing is not just the scale, but the speed. When a destruction, if I have to strangulate someone for like 1 month, then there is a lot of time in 1 month for you and me to come to a negotiating table and discuss it out. But the moment I press the button in half an hour, this goes boom. We don't have that time. So it's also not just the scale, but the speed at which it gets the destruction happens. And the third thing, there are two more things that make nuclear weapons special. The third thing is the ease of deployment. Even when I am losing a war, I am at the brink of defeat, I can use it. So the deterrence works even then. So that is the third thing. And the fourth thing, and the fourth one, which has become a little contested over time, is there is no defense to nuclear weapons. So I can cause massive destruction to you. I can cause it very rapidly. I can cause it at the moment of, at the brink of my defeat. So I can use it then. And so if you sprung a surprise on me, a war which quickly leads to my defeat, I can still use it. And then fourth, and once I decide to use it, there is no defense that you have. So it will be devastating. So those four things are what, and you not find this four like this clearly laid out in any paper or book. It just takes a lot of, Schelling does some part of it, Jervis does. So there are a lot of theorists who go into that and talk about what makes a nuclear weapon special. And the moment when you realize this implication, like what, the devastating impact, and this just flows into other things. Now any bargaining between two nuclear countries becomes suddenly very different from what used to happen in pre-nuclear era, because there is this bomb that can be used. Bargaining during peacetime, bargaining during crisis times. So now people started thinking about it a little more. Some people said that, okay, if I have nuclear superiority, I can use it to my bargaining advantage. Then others said, no, 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 it doesn't matter whether you have nuclear superiority. It just matters that whether you have a survivable arsenal. So if just the parity of having, like, you have nukes, I have nukes that can survive the first strike, that's it. That's good enough. So a lot of things then start to develop around, so it just goes into a whole host of theories and, empirics after that on nuclear weapons. But
So,
yeah,
so I just have a question here, if you don't mind. So,
yeah.
even it seems as if, even in the history of the building of why nuclear weapons are and the reason behind nuclear weapons, or what is loosely called the mutually assured destruction manifesto, even in that, there are not standard reasons to understand what MAD is all about.
Yes, yes. So if you look at the Cold War debates, and it's actually very funny to read some of them. It's also, um, they're talking about life and death in very casual manner. so um, so I think it was Robert McNamara who was debating about what would it mean to, um, comprehensively destroy another society so as to get adequate deterrence. And he's talking about something like 50% of the industrial capacity of a state, and so like something like 25% of the population. And then other people say, okay, this is too much. 10 cities would be enough. Some people say it's like, 2 cities are enough. So yes, there is that controversy. Shouldn't say controversy, but that debate about, what how much deterrence is enough, how much of how, like, what kind of destruction should you be able to cause before it you can say that, okay, you have mutually assured destruction. So I should actually use this opportunity to, project something about what is recently happening in the field about mutually assured destruction. So this goes back to what the big shots in the field earlier, Robert Jervis and Kenneth Walsh, said about theory of what they called theory of nuclear revolution. It's also called nuclear optimism. So what they said is just that you have small arsenal on both sides. That's enough to deter each other. It's, it's not about the certainty of hitting. It's even the uncertainty of hitting your rival that will cause them to deter. Like, even if there is a small chance that my cities will be pulverized, I'll not take that chance and, go to a war thinking that, okay, no, 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 I can, in my first strike, I'll get rid of all of your weapons. Because even if there is a small chance that I leave some of them, they will be good enough to pulverize my cities. So that should be good enough. A small arsenal is good. A small arsenal is good to kick in all deterrent effects. And then the implication that they lay out is spectacular. They say that, superpowers will not go to war, which to this moment has held. that has held. So, like Soviet Union and the US did not go to war for the entirety of Cold War. There'll be crisis will be rare, and now this is contested. Some people say no, the crisis wasn't rare. There were many Cuban Missile Crisis and others where there were the ample amount of opportunities where the other people say, the nuclear war didn't happen, but it was just out of luck. It could have happened. So nuclear optimists said that crisis will be rare. States will not be bargaining hard about it. They'll be ready to concede points, because even if small opportunity that things escalate to a war and then a war to a nuclear war, it will be so devastating that nobody will go to war. Nobody will bargain hard. There should be no arms race. But that is the biggest challenge that they face, because the Soviet Union and the US just went to arms race, and they built like 15,000, 30,000 nuclear weapons at their peak. And now there's a new bunch of political scientists trying to figure out and explain why this happened. So one of those things is this nuclear stalemate, this state of mutually assured destruction, is not easy to attain. And once you attain, you can fall out of it. So, for example, Darrell Press and Keir Lieber have this thing called the myth of nuclear revolution. And Brendan Green says the revolution that failed. So they have these two new books, which all came out, I think, last year or the year before that.
Can you tell a little bit about this, if you don't mind?
Yes. So Darrell Press and Keir Lieber talk about basically technology being the key factor. It's not just about two states that both have nuclear weapons. If the advanced and technologically advanced state can always hold the technologically weaker state at risk. So there are basically three things that they talk about. One is the satellite technology. So earlier, we didn't know where the nuclear weapons are kept, where they are moving. So you could just solve the problem of locating of my nuclear weapons by moving it. Now satellites can keep a track of moving nuclear weapons every minute. And if you have ample number of satellites, which the United States definitely does, it can keep track of, for example, North Korea is geographically small. And Darrell Press and Keir Lieber, if I remember correctly, they say that 97% of the road network of North Korea is under US satellite surveillance for all the time. So which means that they can pretty much see where the nukes are moving, if they're moving. So first is the satellite. So basically the hiding aspect is gone. It's complete transparency. Second is the accuracy revolution. So earlier the missiles that you hit were not accurate, but they need not be accurate because you're hitting a city. It goes from one locality to another locality, doesn't matter. But when you have to hit the arsenal of another country, they need to be accurate. They need to go and hit the exact place where the arsenal is kept. So the accuracy revolution has now the missiles are super accurate. So that's accuracy. So now you can track where they are and hit where they are. And the third thing now, and this is another paper of mine, but which we are not discussing today, but I'll just briefly touch, is the submarines. Now, the nuclear submarines are supposed to be the last resort, the very last defense. Like, okay, you can track my land missiles, you can hit them. You can track my aircrafts on which I'll be loading my missiles. Those aircraft will be kept in certain hangars. You can maybe eliminate them. Maybe I'll shelter them, but if you have bunker buster bombs, or you can highly penetrative bombs, you can maybe even destroy those shelters and get rid of my aircraft. The only way to save aircrafts carrying nuclear weapons is to keep them in the air. Even there they are not safe, because air-to-air attacks are always possible. So the submarines, but on the other hand, are more or less considered pretty safe. But people have to realize that during the Cold War, there's an entire history of US tracking Soviet submarines at all the time. So what happened was the Soviet submarines were noisier than the American submarines. So that meant that you could, so there were sensors placed at the bottom of the seabed, which in deep enough sea, the sound gets converged to a great distance. So, for example, whenever the Soviet submarines would enter the Greenland UK gap, Iceland, Greenland, UK gap, the noise could be detected to at great distance as the Caribbean islands, near the Caribbean islands. So that because the sea, if it is deep enough, it does not bounce off the waves do not bounce off the floor of the sea. They go in a convergent beam and get easily detected. And since the Soviet submarines, at least in the first half of the Cold War, did not have long range missiles, so they could not remain in their home waters in order to hit the US homeland. So they had to come out into the Atlantic Ocean. And the moment they came out in the Atlantic Ocean, they got detected and they were being closely trailed and followed by the American submarines or the British submarines, which were technologically more advanced. So there is a whole history of even submarines being vulnerable. Over a period of time, I think that vulnerability got decreased because when the Soviet submarines got quieter, so they were not the signal gain on your sensors was not exactly the same. And second, the Soviets developed long range missiles for after which they could remain in home waters and could target the US homeland right from there. And penetrating another country's home water and tracking them is another, like, a whole different story. It's a very difficult job, though they have even the naval strategists of the US late Cold War believed they could do that. There were entire strategies and plans in which how they would go. And there's a Navy admiral who says that within 5 minutes we'll get rid of all those Soviet submarines. So I think that was a boast and exaggeration. But anyway, so there's a whole history about how the nuclear vulnerability, so the nuclear stalemate is basically subject to technological conditions. So you will always have to be in a race because these technology factors can basically kick you out of the stalemate at any moment. So there's no option but you have to be in this race always. So these are the new scholars saying there are certain issues. The satellite and the mobile accuracy point is very valid, and one the nuclear optimists have to answer that. But I think the submarines are, in my opinion, if you ask me, submarines are still pretty secure.
All right, but what do you make of the philosophical level of the argument of mutually assured destruction itself? So to explain to people, the MAD doctrine says that if people are both sides are nuclear powers, it usually tends to more peace because both know the devastating effect and the devastating power of the nuclear weapon itself. So beyond a point, it does not matter that let's say the United States of America has X number of nuclear warheads and Pakistan has Y. Or let us look at the India Pakistan standoff too. Now it's not like we have the same number of nuclear warheads, right? We have different number of nuclear warheads, both the
Slightly.
nations. Yeah. Or China and India would be an even better comparison. Like China has way more nuclear warheads than us. But the point is, beyond the point, the mutually assured destruction doctrine says that it doesn't matter. Three is good enough, or four are good enough, or 10 are good enough to basically cause enough damage to cripple a society completely, which will basically be kind of gone forever. And another interesting thing that I once heard was from a Pakistani commentator, Hassan. I forgot his name, the second name. He comes on Pakistani television and says a lot of things. बहुत सारी बातें करते हैं वो बसंती के जैसे. मुझे सारी बातें याद नहीं रहती हैं. मगर he said something very interesting on he was taunting the people who would constantly say हम एटमी ताकत हैं, हम एटमी ताकत हैं. बोलता है हाँ ठीक है, वो भी तो एटमी ताकत हैं. हम सिर्फ बोलते रहते हैं. और the point was that हम उनको मारेंगे, हाँ, मगर वो हमें मारेंगे तो हमारा एक बंदा नहीं बचेगा. सो हिज होल आइडिया वाज दैट ये मैड डॉक्ट्रिन काम नहीं करने वाला, हम पूरे चले जाएंगे, वो बच जाएंगे. सो वेयर डू यू थिंक द ओवरऑल थियोरेटिकल कंसेंसस इज ऑन म्यूचुअली assured destruction actually nuclear weapons leading to more peace?
Yeah. So this goes into several things, but I'll try to tie it up to the India Pakistan one. So I think Pakistan gets a better use. So nuclear weapons are political weapons. So it's not about just using them in action, it's also using them in your politics. And they get better use of nuclear weapons politically. And there are certain reasons why they get better use. There are certain reasons why Pakistan is the only one that can get better use of it rather than us. So, which is that Pakistan is a weaker country, a conventionally weaker country. So whenever there is a fight between conventionally weaker and a stronger country, the stronger is supposed to win the war. Now, unless this weaker one gets nuclear parity. Now, the moment you get nuclear parity with a conventionally stronger rival, now the conventionally stronger one cannot go and defeat you in a war, because you can always threaten nuclear escalation. So it is the stronger country which gets, hamstrung because of the nuclear parity. So it's some sort of a game in which, you had uh, a disadvantage at a lower level, but because getting a parity at the higher level, now since you can jump from here to here, you can get better political advantage of it. And now just because Pakistan cannot be defeated in a conventional war because of nukes, it takes advantage of that to mount, conventional or sub-conventional attacks against India. And now this is basically what is called the stability instability paradox. So stability at the highest level creates instability at the lower levels. So there is a stability. India and Pakistan will not hit each other with nukes, though they are capable of doing that. But that will be silly. Nobody will do that. But since they are both so confident that nobody will escalate to higher levels, so niche ka game is fair game. So now you can do terrorist attacks and be like, even a retaliation would be small and not be big. You are pretty much assured of that, and that is what is called, stability instability paradox, which is a third, like, it's not nuclear optimism, it's not nuclear pessimism. It's the third one. It just says there is reasons to be optimistic because there will not be a nuclear exchange, and just because the actors know that there won't be a nuclear exchange, they would be pretty reckless at the lower levels of violence. To which I should add another thing by so as Paul Kapoor especially worked on India Pakistan dyad, and he says that if a conventionally weaker country facing a stronger rival acquires nuclear weapons, and it's also simultaneously is a territorially revisionist country, which Pakistan is. It wants Kashmir back. It has certain territorial goals. India is pretty much a status quo-ish country in territorial terms. So if a weaker country, which is also territorially revisionist, gets nuclear parity with its rivals, it has incentives to create instability, because it wants to change something. Now it cannot change with its conventional advantage. It has nuclear parity and conventional disadvantage to work with. How will it do? It will do by lower levels of violence, instability at lower levels.
Got it. But then, Kunal, this kind of takes me to a natural follow-up question where then we are incentivizing more and more powers becoming nuclear. Then the Americans, whether it's and when I say Americans, I mean the American establishment. I don't mean the average American people. I mean American people को क्या पता यार, वो तो मतलब establishment करती है. So it doesn't matter whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden administration. They keep saying no, North Korea should not be nuclear, but then Swad Anusar, Biden administration wants the Iran nuclear deal, and Trump administration does not want the Iran nuclear deal. But if the way you have explained the entire scenario with Pakistan and India as as a real world example, but then naturally North Korea would want to be nuclear to secure. I'm not saying Kim Jong Un has some great noble cause or something. Let's not misunderstand where I'm coming from. All I'm saying is, but the nature of the beast itself, that everybody would want to be nuclear so that the Western hegemonic powers don't come and bug them beyond a point. Because what does Pakistan do today? Literally, if you think about it, every once in a while Pakistan will go to America, and what do they show? They show bum hai mere paas, bum hai mere paas. That's all they do. On the other hand, you could very well come back and say that is even more reason for the Americans to make sure these other people do not get bombs. Otherwise, they will also start doing the same thing.
Yes.
So how do we solve this conundrum?
That's politics regularly, like things solve themselves out, like but to get to a, like, so North Korean regime is an interesting example. So their primary goal of getting nuclear weapons is regime security. you know the people in America don't like that regime, and they have got rid of dictators elsewhere, so they can get rid of dictator in North Korea as well. And there have been previous attempts at getting rid of the Kim dynasty. So it's now the nukes are basically a regime security tool for North Korea. Now, the moment you mess with the ruling establishment in North Korea, you know what can come at you, right? So the primary aim is this. Now, there are the people who say that it's not just that; it's also, basically Korean unification or North Korea. So, the North Koreans and the South Koreans both want Korean unification, but South Koreans want it on their terms. The North Korean wants it on their terms. So one has nukes, so it might be able to dictate, their terms more than the other. But other also has an alliance with the US, which has its own nukes. So anyway, so yes, so there are more and more countries would, especially those countries which perceives it some threat. It's not necessary that a threat is required for you to start a nuclear weapons program, but in most cases you will find that there'll be some threat, or at least for example, Pakistan. It's a very interesting thing. Almost all Western academics, including some Indian academics, say that Pakistan started a nuclear program after the 1971 war because it perceived a higher threat, because India had just got in and divided the country into two. And once you can do that to some other country, there was a humiliating moment for Pakistan, and it said that, okay, we will not have this again. And so, how to prevent it? To go about nuclear weapon. At least, I don't know. I have written in Hindustan Times explaining earlier why this is not a very convincing explanation. Because what happens at the end of 71 war is also that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto comes to power, and if Bhutto, one can trace Bhutto's thoughts before 71, and he was always for nuclear weapons. He tried to start a nuclear weapons program even during, Ayub Khan's presidency. It's just that he couldn't. So if Bhutto had come to power with or without 71 war, he would have started a nuclear weapons program. So it's not always necessary that you feel a security threat to start a nuclear weapons program, but in generally many cases you do, and the perceived security threat actually helps in mobilizing the domestic opinion in favor of the nuclear weapons program. It's not a coincidence that after the 1964 Chinese test at Lop Nur, so the Shastri government gave a go ahead for the peaceful nuclear explosions. Like, it started the work for peaceful nuclear explosion, which was then concluded by Indira Gandhi later. So it's not just a coincidence that once the threat appears, you begin working on that threat to counter it. Now, as you said, before North Korea got nuclear weapons, nobody was treating it fairly. And now whether they should be treated fairly is another question. But no, like, they were not being treated like any other state. They are not the only dictators in the world. There are other dictators which get a much more lavish treatment, right? So that's also a fact. They're not so. But the moment they got the nuclear weapons, and especially the ICBM capability with the intercontinental ballistic missiles, which can go and hit now the US base, US homeland. After that, you saw US President Trump conducting 2 summits with the North Korean leader, which had never happened before. A sitting US president meeting North Korean leadership in a long way. So, suddenly your bargaining power does increase. That's what it is called. Pakistan is the one which bargains with the gun to its own head. We have the bomb. So your bargaining power does increase once you get the bomb. And that is why, just because you have that enhanced bargaining power, these other states have an incentive to stop you from getting that bargaining leverage. And not just bargaining leverage, once there is a war and maybe an accident, more nuclear weapons means more chances of a nuclear accident. So, there are incentives. Now, how do we solve this? We don't know. It's just politics every day takes care of it. Maybe maybe at some point, Iran will get a nuclear bomb. We don't know. And if Iran gets, there'll be pressure. There'll be pressure on Saudi Arabia to get it as well. I think the Crown Prince has already stated that if Iran gets a bomb, they will get one too. Now, I think it's easier for the US to stop Saudi Arabia than it is to stop Iran, but that's another matter. So there'll be pressure on Saudi Arabia, there'll be pressure on Egypt, there'll be pressure on Turkey to get nuclear weapons. And once there's already a increased public opinion in South Korea now, in some latest surveys, favors of indigenous nuclear weapon in South Korea. In Japan, Prime Minister Abe was pretty clear that we should think about nuclear weapons. And Japanese public opinion is very against nuclear weapons for understandable reasons. But there are now American experts now writing a paper. Two American professors have written a paper that's the only way to save US South Korea alliance is by allowing South Korea to get a nuclear bomb of its own. So we might be at a cusp where the next slot of nuclear weapons countries might begin to think about it and may emerge as nuclear weapons country. We don't know, but there is a movement towards that in South Korea, in Japan, in Iran. Obviously, is very close to the bomb, and once Iran gets it, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey are the candidates.
In your paper, because this reminded me of a bit of your paper, you talk about the theories of not letting people get the weapon and the different strategies that are used. I think it was in the mid range or the latter half of the paper, if I remember correctly. In your dissertation,
Yeah.
you laid down all the strategies written by different scholars, and the effectivity, or whether they are effective or not, is a separate issue. But can we actually talk about, see, a lot of people think कि हाँ कुछ तो करेंगे, अरे मगर क्या करेंगे ये तो किसी को भी नहीं मालूम है. So can you maybe talk about that aspect of your paper, because I remember clearly you giving a little bit of time and explaining the different strategies deployed by different people in this very area.
Yes. One of the so this is basically counter-proliferation. Now we have moved into that domain. So counter-proliferation is basically, once I am a state, and if I know that another state is starting to make nuclear weapons or is planning to, maybe rush towards a bomb or maybe just keep an option open. So now I have to stop it. And how do I stop it? There are various ways. So broadly speaking, there are 3 or 4 ways. One is you do a military attack. The second, you do some kind of diplomatic with and bargain with the other state. And the third is like maybe form a collective union and do bargaining. And the fourth is basically you do nothing. So there have been, so one of the reasons why this topic has been studied in the past by a lot of scholars is because of the military attack. So it can lead to wars. It can lead to actual use of military force. When your rival is making nuclear weapons, you can use force to stop it. Now, this has been done in the past, particularly by the Israelis. They have bombed Osirak in 1981 in Iraq, that Osirak nuclear plant. And then they have bombed in 2007 the Syrian plant, the Syrian nuclear reactor. So they have bombed a couple of nuclear reactors. It has in peacetime. So that's significant part of those attacks. They happened in peacetime. There were surprise attacks, stealth attacks. US has bombed Iraqi reactors, but during the Gulf War, so it was part of the war. But again, there was something new about this war. But the hot reactors, our operational reactors, were attacked. So anybody who talks about current Russia-Ukraine war and Russia is, and there's something unprecedented about attacking nuclear reactors, so it's not, because it has been done in the past. And so yes, so there is this military aspect. So one, you can like Israelis went to Iraq or to Syria, they just went out and destroyed the reactor. They sent a sortie of F-16s and destroyed the reactor. So that's one way to do it. But the good thing, that the advantage they had it to both those programs, the Iraqi program in 1981 and the Syrian program in 2007, was a very small nuclear weapons program. They were nascent programs. They were just beginning to take shape. In to the extent that in 2007, when the Israeli Prime Minister, I think it was Ehud Olmert, who talked to George W. Bush, who said, the CIA cannot confirm that it is definitely a weapons program. They later revised their opinion and said, yes, it was a nuclear weapons program. But at that moment, it was so early that CIA could not confirm that it was a weapons program. So those early stage programs are easy to be hit because they are just 1 or 2 reactors. The locations are known, not well protected, and you can get away with it, like by attacking. A small attack can be good enough, but in a later stage, when you have to react 7 reactors in different parts of the country, you're basically declaring a war. So there'll be wars, reply will be a war. So military options are pursued, but they're generally pursued at an early stage, as we have seen. Now, people will say that they have been also pursued at the later stage. Yes, they have been considered at a later stage, but they have not been pursued. For example, when the Chinese were very close to the bomb in 1963 and 64, the Americans pursued, like considered the attacking the Chinese reactors, but they did not go ahead with the plan. The idea, in the end, the president Lyndon Johnson decided that if for some other reason we happen to be fighting a war with China or some conflict, we can take opportunistic advantage of that conflict to mount this attack on these reactors. But we cannot do it, something which is especially for these reactors, also because the Chinese nuclear facilities were deep inland into the Chinese territory. And once you do a deep strikes, it's always dangerous. Plus, the Soviets could have been threatened that it's directed at them. So the Soviets were not on board with attacking Chinese nuclear program then. So military attacks get considered at a later stage, but they have never been executed. But there is an advantage to even considering a military attack in later stages, which is for bargaining purpose. It's once you threaten, for example, there is a like if Joe Biden has been asked that will you do a nuclear attack? Will you attack Iranian nuclear facilities if there is no deal? And he hasn't ruled it out. He doesn't say that I won't do it because that's useful. That threat of attack is useful bargaining tool that will always keep the Iranians at toes, and they know that the cost of not coming to the table and negotiating a deal in good faith is that there is always a chance, maybe remote, but there is always a chance that an attack could happen on Iranian nuclear facilities, and once that happens, they will have to basically start from zero. If the program gets completely destroyed, they have to at least physically start from zero, even though the know-how and technology and personnel will be there. So they're aware of that. So it's useful as bargaining. It's also useful for third party. For example, let's say India wants Iranian oil and it's not cooperating with the US, but for now it is cooperating. But let's imagine a hypothetical scenario. If it's not cooperating with the US on imposing sanctions on Iranian oil, then maybe the threat of attack on Iran and a destabilization in the Middle East will skyrocket the oil prices, and then India will be on board. Okay, fine, I'll cooperate with the sanctions because they are less costly to me than a destabilization in the Middle East and my current account deficit going completely bonkers. So the threat. This is how we think about military attacks in counterproliferation. You either do it at early stage, when you do it as a surprise attack, or you do it at later stage, but that's mostly consideration and using it as a threat in bargaining. Then the second thing is you can do some kind of diplomacy. Now diplomacy tends to not understand, like people don't understand what is diplomacy properly. So they think people coming around and talking is diplomacy. That is not diplomacy. You have to have some leverage over your other partner. You should threaten, if you don't do this, I'll do that, right? That should be at the back of any diplomatic negotiation. So one way for a new nuclear power is making a nuke because it perceives a security threat. So what you can offer it is reduce the security threat. And how you can do is by offering an alliance. So the US, for example, offered an alliance to France and West Germany in order to stop them from making nuclear weapons. Same for South Korea, for Australia. So this, offering an alliance in order to stop them from making nuclear weapons is one way to do it. By you reduce their security threat. Their demand for nuclear weapons will go down once their security threat is reduced. Another is, okay, you don't want to provide, alliance because that's also costly. You have to come to their defense and all that. So what if you are a very big trade partner, if you give them if you are a donor, if you supply them military weapons, so you can use that leverage. For example, the Russians use that leverage with Soviets use that leverage with Romania in order to stop it. The Soviets use that leverage even with North Korea. the Soviet Union tried to stop North Korea's nuclear weapons in 1980s and 90s. So it had that leverage. It's tried to stop Egypt. It tried to stop Libya. So there's a whole host of counter proliferation, not just by the US but also by the Soviet Union. So you use that leverage. Sometimes that threatening of leverage is not enough, so you need to apply that sanctions beforehand, which is what is happening with Iran right now. There's a multilateral coalition of the US, Germany, France, UK, China, and Russia who are now applying these sanctions. And then so the punishment is imposed first, and then you negotiate, so that now you give up your nuclear weapon program, and then we will remove the sanction. That's another way of conducting diplomacy itself, though it's like closer to punitive diplomacy. And finally, you may not be able to do something about it. Maybe you don't have the power. You don't have the power to strike militarily. You don't have the power to apply sanctions. Then what do? You find someone else who can do this. For example, when the Taiwanese were worried that China is making nuclear weapons, so the Taiwanese basically informed it to the US, and they tried to, when the US was considering their attack, the Taiwanese wanted to support those attack programs. They were ready to send a militia of Taiwanese forces which could land and create disruption in the nuclear facilities, and those plans were in place, were never executed. So that is something. If you can't do it yourself, you find someone who can do it. So that's one option. And the final option is you do nothing. You do nothing because you're not interested in doing anything. For example, you're like if the Argentinians are making nuclear weapons, the South Koreans are not interested in it, so they'll do nothing. Or maybe they can't do anything. For example, if India is making nukes, Sri Lanka cannot do anything about it. So that's another reason why people will not do it. So there's a broad variety from doing nothing to executing military attacks. States have chosen different strategies along this spectrum, and that's what my dissertation tries to explain, that when do states choose which strategy.
But then what are like obviously different states are going to use different strategies, but in the literature itself, actually, and this is something I could not understand from the paper, maybe it's my mistake, is like, is there a more preferred strategy?
Yeah. So again, it depends on where you are, like how much threat do you perceive as a result of your rival acquiring nuclear weapons. So for let's consider the Iran example. If Iran gets a nuclear bomb, it considered a big threat in Israel, is because the Ayatollah Khomeini has said that Iran is a cancerous tumor which has to be eliminated from the face of the earth. That is what Ayatollah Khomeini has said. And that
एक minute, he wants to eliminate himself.
Oh, so Israel.
Yeah, because I was like, यार ईरान को ईरानी क्यों उड़ाना चाहता है?
So Khomeini said Israel is a cancerous tumor which has to be eliminated. So if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, that means it's a huge threat to Israel. Right now, the threat, because the threat is huge, you will be willing to take riskier methods to stop it. When the threat as a result of your rival acquiring nukes is huge, so for actually not just the change of threat. For example, if India before acquiring nuclear weapons could eliminate Bhutan of the map, and it could eliminate after acquiring nuclear weapons. So in substantive terms, nothing changes for Bhutan as a result of nuclear weapons in India's hand. So it will not have any incentive to stop India's nuclear weapons. But for Pakistan, it's different. The things somewhat change more than Bhutan. So it's the motivation of stopping. What motivation you have to stop your rival from getting to the bomb depends on the change in the threat level as your rival, before and after your rival acquires the bomb. So for example, so I've tried to measure this change in threat. So one is like, if you think there is an existential threat from the country acquiring nuclear weapons. So if Iran says that I will eliminate you from the face of the earth, then there is an existential threat. And it's not just they're saying it. Israel is a territorially a very small country which actually can be eliminated in a one full go strike of nuclear weapons. So that Israel can fight conventional wars. They're very good, militarily advanced, scientifically advanced countries, so they can fight good conventional wars. But they cannot fight a nuclear war. In fact, they cannot fight it at all because they just don't have the geographical depth for it. Uh, like for example, compared to Mao. Mao once said to Nehru that even if nuclear weapons are used, India, the remaining 300 million Chinese will make a glorious empire or something like that. So that is not something which Israeli leader can say. So the same goes for Taiwan. Again, geographically small, so it can be eliminated from the face of the earth by. It at least thought the Mao could be that reckless and could do that. So it depends on the threat. So first is facing existential threat. Second, if your rival, which is acquiring nuclear weapons, has a territorial dispute with you. Now, nuclear weapons in themselves are not very useful at acquiring territory. Nuclear weapons are too blunt an instrument to use. The tanks are better to go and acquire territory. But what nuclear weapons can do is, if you can use your conventional might, or you can use surprise, or whatever other tools that you have to acquire a territory, then the nuclear weapons can be used to preserve those gains. That was basically the Kargil war. So once India and Pakistan both got nuclear weapons, the Musharraf tried to get some chunk of the Kargil territory, and the idea was that now nuclear parity means that we will get to keep it. And the international community will descend upon both countries that, okay, let them keep it because you both are nuclear, we cannot allow this. That was the calculation in the Kargil war. It failed is another matter, but sometimes it doesn't fail. For example, Russia's invasion of Crimea is something similar. Though Ukraine doesn't have nukes, but that's why it also worked very well, because it could use its conventional might to capture Crimea. And then basically it gets frozen. Crimea is basically, for good or bad reasons, is it with Russia today. So you cannot use your nukes for acquiring territory, but you can use it to preserve it. Now anybody who tries to overthrow the Russians from Crimea will have to consider Russian nukes. It's not easy that now even the US will not support Ukraine in doing that, throwing Russians out of Crimea, or throwing the Chinese out of some islands in South China Sea. Right, so that becomes important because the Chinese nukes or the Russian nukes will come into play. And the third is, basically if two countries are rivals in a particular sphere of influence, they have overlapping sphere of influence, then again nukes become important. For example, my go-to example to explain this is the Persian Gulf. If the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, by Iran, and it does not allow oil transit in order as a bargaining leverage, then there are research papers on how easily and quickly or slowly can the US remove that blockade. And people have found that it's not easy. Even though eventually the US will be able to eliminate the blockade, it won't be short and a simple operation. Now imagine how the complexity of that operation will increase if the Iran gets nuclear. It's not just now they can hold a critical oil route at risk by blockading it, and removal of that blockade will be multifold complex, and maybe nobody might even dare to do it if the Iranians have nuclear weapons that can reach all parts of the earth. So that becomes more complex. And finally, superpowers have this concern that we have to limit the number of nuclear weapons in the club, because if one gets it, the other will get it, and then the other will get it, and then the other will get it. Because now the Iranians get it, Saudi Arabia will feel a threat, it will get it. When someone will feel a threat from Saudi Arabia, it will get it, and so on and so on. So there's a domino effect. So basically, these are the four reasons which contribute, motivation for stopping. So the higher the motivation, if you feel an existential threat, you will be willing to take riskier moves. But if you only have domino threat, then you'll say, okay, no, that's that's not much of a concern. Okay, we'll try to stop it, but not, we'll just use diplomacy rather than going military. But if feel you feel threatened by three of, like, either existential threat or many of these parameters on this one, then you'll feel higher threat, and maybe you'll consider riskier moves like military attacks.
You know what I find very interesting, and before this will be my last question before I start taking viewers' questions also, because I want to give some time. There are 5 or 7 questions already that I have to ask. So, something that has always bothered me as a humble student of philosophy, even when it comes to these nuclear discussions, military discussions, you know, i- it is almost considered as if every country or every nation has an equal right to have or become a nuclear power, because there is no moral standard that we judge nations by. It is very interesting, especially with this wave of moral relativism that has engulfed the West itself internally. Internally, the West is going through a very absurdist sort of a relativistic mindset. Now the American state is very different. Till now the American state is still very hawkish, it is very interfering, whether people like it or not, which is good and bad depending on which side of the aisle you are. I mean, let's be very clear. But we should not forget that, all society, like, I have no shame in saying this. Again, these are my views, these are not Kunal's views, so please don't attribute it to them, to him. And I believe societies are good and bad objectively. Like, I believe India as a society is objectively better than Pakistan. I have no shame in saying that also. Objectively better than Pakistan if we compare mano a mano Indians with Pakistanis also, in qualitative parameters set based on human flourishing. Pakistan doesn't deserve a nuclear weapon more than India deserves a nuclear weapon, because India will be more responsible with it. Pakistan will be more irresponsible with it. That's my point. Why has this not been of late, not even a consideration in nuclear counterproliferation or non-proliferation or whatever?
I don't think it hasn't been. It has been, actually. So, but you know what happens? So, one way to, so I'll not go into philosophically which people are better and which people are worse, because I don't have an expertise on that. But there is something about regime type. People think that, okay, a democracy might be more responsible with nuclear weapons than a autocracy, and that sometimes becomes, the why we need to stop Iran is because it is some kind of a hardline regime. So that is one argument that's very popular in the US. Why do you want to stop North Korea? It's because it's a dictatorship. It's a very close dictatorship. It's a totalitarian regime. We need to stop it. So that those kind of arguments do get the play. What happens in nuclear weapons is, like, at the end it boils down to power. Because no matter how moral do you think you are, like the US Americans might think they are very much moral compared to Iranians or North Koreans. If the North Koreans have still got it, they've got it. You tried, you couldn't stop. That's the end of matter. Now, obviously, there's the Americans are still to accept a new North Korean bomb, but it exists. It does not mean that just because you don't accept it, it will vanish. So yeah, the moral arguments do get, especially in these terms, dictatorship versus democracy, the regime type arguments do get marshaled in order to stop. And there's also a theory about, like, the counter proliferation attacks are more common against, autocratic regimes rather than democratic regimes. Now, this is the problem with these arguments in general, are also what is called, reverse causality in social sciences. So it's maybe it's because it's the democratic regimes are also in the developed part of the world. They don't face territorial threat, they don't face nasty neighbors, they don't face all those things, so they're more secure. They don't want nuclear weapons. They have nuclear umbrella by the US and all that. Now, it is the bad part of the world which has all these security threats, territorial threats, unsettled disputes, which wants nuclear weapons. So this also happens to be the primarily the non-democratic part of the world, But so It's also, it's not just like you have to stop these regimes because these are bad regimes. These are bad regimes also because of the security threat they face. So there is also the people say, for example, there is an argument in international relations that democracies don't go to war with each other. It is called democratic peace theory or something. So it's an empirical
इस पे
reality.
एक बुक भी थी, इस पे एक बुक भी थी.
There are many books, many papers. This is a well-trodden literature. Many people have written about, how big democracy. So this is an empirical reality. Very rarely have democracies gone to war, but democracies do go to war with other countries, but not with other democracies. So that's an empirical puzzle, and people have come up with their own theories. Some of these theories belong to very liberal, schools of thought, in which they believe that democracies value rule of law. When they see that the other state also values rule of law, and then they don't do nasty things to each other. Now, one may be, but I am not convinced of this, because I also believe that you are democracy in the first place because you are secure. It just happens to be that democracies don't fight each other because they are already secure. There were previous colonial regimes, they have satisfied all their wealth and territorial desires that they had, and now they have happily turned into democracies, secure and preaching others about the value of democracy and human rights and everything. But it's because in the rest of the world, it's those things which got settled 300 years back in Europe are still being settled, and that's why they are still not democracies. So it's to say that democracies are peaceful is also to hide the reverse causality, that peaceful societies become democracies.
Yeah.
So again, so there are moral aspects to nuclear weapons. They get marshaled out, but we also know what it is. These moral arguments get weaponized. It's not just because Americans, maybe Americans also feel that they are morally superior to Iranians or North Koreans or whatever. But at least in the policy domain, a lot of people also weaponize this morality argument in order to get their desired policy objectives.
Mm-hmm.
Some people just want to throw the Iranian regime, and that's about it. And they will use any argument, morality or otherwise, to achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I get it. I get it. Yeah, it's just something that has always fascinated me in this line. Like, look, I unfortunately am a very limited knowledge in this field. I just look at these things and I listen to commentary. That's all I can do. I can read books and listen to commentary. And the bit on democracy is very real. That as the adage goes, 100 चूहे खाकर बिल्ली हज को चली. वो कहावत इस पे पूरी फिट बैठती है कि आपने पूरे दुनिया के ऊपर कर लिया, उसके बाद आपने रियलाइज कि हाय ये तो बहुत गलत था. दिस इज. और इसका एक और बहुत बड़ा एग्जांपल आजकल नॉर्थ अमेरिका में ये बड़ा फैशन चालू है. मेरे को बहुत हंसी आती है जब भी देखता हूँ. जाओगे ना किधर बड़े कॉर्पोरेट ऑफिस में या यूनिवर्सिटी में, वी वुड लाइक टू फर्स्ट एक्नॉलेज दैट दिस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन वाज बिल्ट on the land owned by this tribe, this tribe, this tribe, this tribe, this tribe. ऐसे एकदम आंखों में एकदम वो इमोशनल बॉलीवुड के सीन की इमोशन लाके करते हैं. देन I only want to ask them this question. लैंड वापस देने वाले हैं क्या? तो फिर पका क्यों रहा है?
Mostly, I would appreciate the sentiment if it was genuine, but
It is
abhi,
not.
it's all performance.
Yeah, it's all performative. It is all, I am so nice, I am so kind, I want to self-flagellate, I want to self-flagellate. They don't give a damn. Like, I can't take the name. There was a professor here and a doctor here. Both of them gave me the same answer. They said every meeting that we have now starts with this. And I'm just sitting over there because this person has come from India, or another person has come from another country that was basically pulverized by the West. They are sitting there. अरे मैंने तो कुछ किया ही नहीं, मुझे क्यों बोल रहे हो ये करने को? The whole point was I am myself colonized originally by you people. Why are you making me say this? I have nothing to say. So yeah, I understand where you're coming from and I totally relate to it. But now let us start taking questions, क्योंकि काफी questions हैं. So I'll start first with this थोड़ा लंबा question है, so bear with me. Someone has asked Kunal, how does he see the nuclear deterrent between India and Pakistan post Balakot? That is the first half of the question. Also, people don't ask questions about nuclear deterrence between India and China, wherein a lot of IA generals have voiced giving away its NFU vis-a-vis China, where PLA manages to capture huge amounts of Indian territory in case of long-term conflict in the Himalayas.
Yeah. So let me do the Balakot one first. So, so something happened, right? In Balakot, we don't know what was hit. Something was hit. I don't know. Maybe nothing was hit. Most probably, nothing substantial was hit. And the next day, our plane got downed. A pilot was captured. It, as an operation, I wouldn't term it successful. However, something happened. We did something new, which was to put ordinance on undisputed Pakistani territory. In that, there was a message. Despite this overall, which I would call failure of the overall operation, despite the failure, a message was sent that next time there is a big terrorist attack, we will be willing to draw new lines. The line earlier was okay, you do something in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, but now you went to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and dropped the ordinance. It may not have hit the desired building, but wherever it hit, it was dropped on an undisputed territory. So a new line was drawn. The old lines were erased. So now the message is that if there is a major terrorist attack next, this might happen again. And you remember, like, I think 26th of February, 27th of February, and afterwards were very tense periods in South subcontinent. And yeah, jang ho sakti hai was what I was in Delhi, jang ho sakti hai, and I saw very nervous faces, in especially in the newsroom. So once you begin to threaten that any major terrorist incidents में जंग हो सकती है, then you have escalated. That means you have sent a new message. Earlier was कि when major terrorist attack होगा तो we will send you a dossier. Now that has been changed. I do think the operation was a failure, but a message I think was sent, a new line was drawn that next time you do that. Now, whether it is effective or not, I don't know. Maybe the Pakistani military decides कि यार ये जो है ना एक time message भेज दिया था, next time they won't do something like that. It's not always. पिछली बार इनको भी पता चल गया इनका operation fail हो गया, and they also were not very comfortable with the idea of जंग हो सकती है, and they might be right in drawing that lesson. Who knows next time? So there are different lessons that the Pakistanis can draw from the message we sent. It depends on which one they draw. Uh, the second question is about China and no first use, right? So the no first use is a very, very much debated topic. I don't know for what reason. No first use are three words written on a piece of paper. The moment the Chinese threaten, for example, threaten Siliguri corridor and hack off our northeast from the rest of the country, or something like that, something on the bigger scale, the paper gets thrown out of the window.
All bets are off.
Yeah, so I don't understand why do we talk so much about the three words written on a piece of paper. It's a stated doctrine. Nobody in the world follows stated doctrine. Tell me one country which writes and does the same thing, says and does the same thing. Nobody does it. So I don't know why we keep talking about so much about why no first use. So I just don't get the whole point about this.
I totally agree with you. It is like the Americans telling the world, "We will give you freedom and democracy as we bomb the living daylights out of you." That's what it's all about.
It's good to keep saying that we will have no first use, while do what you want when the time comes for it.
Yeah. So pretend to be something else, but inside you can be Jagira, like Jagira was China Gate. That's what it is. All right. So this question, I don't know if you want to answer it or not, because I think ये Indians की ये दुखती रग है. इसके लिए मैं question तो पूछ रहा हूँ. How can a state sponsor of terror like Pakistan continue to enjoy, in quotes, chhatra chaya of DC establishment, especially the Pentagon and the think tank community? How come someone like Khalid Kidwai gets invited to address major conferences? Wow. I will add to this. Where have we as a society failed in our efforts to pin this?
Yes, I keep thinking about this topic, but I don't know if I have an answer. So let me
Nobody
just
does.
think aloud, think aloud rather than give a definitive answer because I don't have. So I guess some part of it is history, how Cold War unfolded. Pakistanis were an alliance partner in mid 1950s. They became an alliance partner of the US. We did not. We went in the we were non-aligned, but more or less aligned with the Soviet Union. So that part is history. Uh, Pakistanis enjoy a great geographical space. For example, if you want to go to Afghanistan, there are very few routes from which the US can logistically reach there. Send material, drones or whatever. So they either they use Iran, which they can't have a good relationship, US, or they use Russia again, which they can't have good relations with, or they use some Central Asian countries to on which either the Russians or now the Chinese have good influence on. So the Pakistan, the good and the thing about Pakistan is at the right price they agree to everything, and that's business minded, which is so if you promise them an IMF loan or something like that, for the US, flexing some muscles in the IMF is not so difficult. It's not such a big deal. So you can get a loan for the Pakistanis passed in the IMF, and you can get your logistics sent to the Afghanistan, for example, if you want to kill a terrorist, do a drone operation, whatever. So in that sense, Pakistan has a great geographical. It lies at a great geographical space, and it knows how to make use of that. It got nuclear weapons again. It knows how to make political use of that. Where have we failed? I think there is a lot of complacency in India that हम तो हमारा हो जाएगा, like we will be fine, and that shows, then I'll, and now there are certain aspects of it which I would rather talk offline about, but we as a society haven't really grappled with this
And
problem.
for the record, even I don't say half the things that I hear. I mean, because you host a platform, you are privileged to many things and you get to know many things. Obviously, you're not supposed to say half the things that, in fact, half of the times, people like you or I don't say things is because it harms India more than it benefits India. So why would we want to harm our own country? So yeah, so I agree with you, and I 100% support you in not answering this beyond a certain point in detail. I totally support you, and I appreciate it that पूरी धुलाई नहीं कर दी. So I appreciate that. So I totally get it. Now obviously देखो, I don't blame me, मगर अभी इंडियन पॉडकास्ट है, सारे क्वेश्चन पाकिस्तान के ऊपर ही हैं, so I don't know what to do.
Okay.
सारे क्वेश्चन पाकिस्तान के ऊपर आ रहे हैं because न्यूक्लियर पाकिस्तान लोगों को टेंशन होती है. All right. So this viewer has asked, Pakistan often claims that they'll use, in quotes, tactical nukes in an event on invasion from India, hinting that it would not cause major damage, but they are open to uses. How do you see it?
um, yes, so I think so uh, uh, so tactical nukes are basically battlefield nukes. So whenever they get to the scenario in which it is envisioned that they will be used is the one in which, for example, something like a cold start doctrine that the Indian Army has or doesn't have, we are fuzzy about it a little. So, for example, let's say there is a major terrorist attacks. There is some Indian Army troops go into the Pakistani border, do an operation with limited or somewhat ambitious goals, whatever they are. And then, if the Pakistanis feel threatened, they use tactical nuclear weapons on their own soil against our troops. Now, this is one. This is fantastic to use nukes on your own soil. Like, that's not a very good thing to do. Not a very credible threat. You will be affected with your own radiation. Now, obviously, the India and Pakistan are joint. There are rivers that flow from one place to other, wind that blows from, so the radiation wahan pe will always come back to India and all that. But this whole thing about attacking Indian troops on Pakistani soil is not very credible. But madman, people can do silly like do. So one of the things, the Indian nuclear doctrine says that whether you attack with us with a midget nuke or the bigger nuke, we will attack you back with the bigger nuke. So there is no middle rung in our own doctrine. Whether you amend the doctrine or not, I think it's valuable to think about in gradations. Should the reply of a tactical nuclear weapon definitely be a massive retaliation? So massive, in fact, compared to the no first use, I find the massive retaliation a bigger problem in our doctrine, because that's also not very credible. So if 50 of your troops die in a tactical nuclear attack on Pakistani soil, will you destroy Karachi and Lahore for that? Doesn't sound credible to me. And then that means you need to think it in gradation terms. Maybe if tactical nukes are used on your troops on their soil, maybe you just need to go and destroy the Pakistani army headquarters in a attack. That's it. And not do a, destroy Lahore and Karachi. So I think there is value in thinking in gradation terms. I don't know if someone inside the Indian establishment already does that. In case, then that's good. But if they don't think, I think there's value in thinking about it.
In the series of Pakistan questions, here's one more. Pakistan is becoming very unstable day by day, both politically and economically. In the event that the country breaks up, what will happen to its nuclear weapons? सारे इंडियंस को पाकिस्तान की टेंशन है. बाजू में इतना बड़ा चीन बैठा है, इंडियंस को नहीं पड़ी है. हमारा पूरा फोकस पाकिस्तान के ऊपर होता है.
So again, I think the Prime Minister's office, Defense Ministry, Home Ministry should have a document of planning that in case Pakistan breaks up, or in case there is a danger of nuclear terrorism or whatever in Pakistan, we should have a document which says exactly what we will do. I doubt that we have it. I am more sure that the Pentagon has something like that. In case Pakistan breaks up, in case there are dangers of Al Qaeda or Lashkar-e-Toiba or whatever getting nukes or whatever, in some kind of instability in Pakistan, I guess Department of Defense in the US has a document which lays out what will they do. It's not a very easy scenario. You'll have to think through a lot. It's not something that I can right now tell ki ye kar denge. It's not. You have to think through all the scenarios. What are your assets on the ground? What can you do? What assets can you mobilize quickly? I think that should have been done, and there already should be a detailed document on point number 1, activate this. Point number 2, active. I doubt we have it, but if not, we should do it right away.
Yeah, but don't you think it says a lot about us also that we just don't have the intellectual exercises that we should?
We are a low state capacity country, so we try to firefight every day जो नया problem आता है.
It's terrible. It's terrible and it's heartbreaking. Well, finally, one question which has nothing to do with Pakistan. How do you see the nuclear deterrent playing out in the case of Israel and North Korea as well?
I mean, Israel. I didn't get the connection of this question. Like, Israel is an old nuclear power. North
No,
Korea.
but in the let's say North Korea. So, what do you think is going to happen in the North Korean case? The West is trying its best to deal with North Korea. See, I don't under you know as crazy as it sounds, I think Donald Trump actually tried to do something about it in his own weird way. He called him Rocket Man, which is I don't get it. I don't get why Donald Trump did the way. Do you think a lot of times people were kind of worried because of Trump and his mercurial character? Do you think that had a role to play कि ये ऐसा पागल है क्या करेगा कुछ मालूम नहीं है kind of a scenario?
I think there is some of that in American public, especially the public I meet. I'm in Boston, Cambridge. It's a very blue campus, and anyway, the city. So whatever I see is a lot of there's just sheer embarrassment कि ऐसा बंदा हमारा president बन गया. There's a lot of embarrassment among people that we made this guy the president, and all lot of that just flows from that sentiment. And sometimes I feel that's harmful because there's Like you may find the person distasteful, but you can still do an analytical exercise about unsentimentally. But somehow that is easier said than done. People find it very difficult to keep the personality aside and do an unsentimental analysis of Trump's foreign policy. And the sentiment, like everything, like if it is said by, I have seen professors and everybody, talk about, even if they have to praise Trump, they will first like 10 or like 3 or 4 lines about how Trump is bad and everything, but now this policy was good. And now, so if all his policies were flawed, why are some of them being, many of them being continued by Biden administration? So I think that Rocket Man and all that was very silly and stupid. But the later, I think the summits failed, but at least that was a start. When the Chinese were getting nuclear weapons in 1960s, the debate in America was very similar, that this is Mao, this is crazy, this is, we cannot allow China to get this because they are irrational, they are not the sane people. Mao is definitely not sane and all that. But look what happened. Over time, China got normalized. Now the US and China live in a some sort of a nuclear stalemate, whether you call it mutually assured destruction or not. But they accept each other's nuke. They recognize the risk. They take, and both are in, whether we like Indians like China or not, but China has more or less handled its nuclear weapons very responsibly so far. So it, if you give a chance, this, and not just giving a chance, it is the only, probably the only option left with the US. You have to enter into a mutual deterrence with North Korea. Because the alternative is military attack, which can, maybe eliminate millions of people, which is not something anybody would recommend. So uh, I guess the US ultimately should, and I may have to, give nuclear mutual deterrence a chance with North Korea. And that, I think, the summit with Trump may have led to that direction if there was not so much. So right now, I think that the biggest thing that hampers American diplomacy is the polarization at the domestic level. Now, the Biden cannot enter into this Iranian deal because he cannot accept certain terms for which he will be roasted back by the Republicans here, right? Like there is nothing that the US can do, concede anything, and it depends. It's not about Biden or Trump. Anybody who is in power, because the polarization is so high, that consensus that one state and society should have for things outside its border just does not exist in America, and therefore no president can make any deal on which they can get roasted back here, and that really is hampering American diplomacy.
Yeah, just one last question, and I guess, this will be my closing question, and we can wrap it up, I guess, after that, because we're almost at an hour and 20 minutes. How much, because it's all about counterproliferation or non-proliferation, and different strategies around them. How much of America's internal societal struggle, we live in the era of basically American society being like the Jagat policemen. Whether we like it or not, they are. I mean, I know people don't like to accept it, but they are the world policemen. Now, in this era of American society going through, I don't know what word am I supposed to use with it. They're going through an internal crisis right now. America as a society is trying to grapple with its past in a very self-flagellating way, and it is sending mixed signals to their old allies. In that situation, do you think more Western powers also now trying to become independently nuclear, considering how Trump said, like Trump's remarks on NATO were very interesting. They're not pulling their weight. That's what he said, right? Famously, Trump said that they need to contribute more. And then with the Biden administration taking a U-turn on that, but the Biden administration going full on self-flagellating internally inside their own society, like how the French look at America now. The French are very clear, oh, we don't want this American social science culture coming into our society. But at the end of the day, social sciences do influence policy making, because they have a disproportionate influence on policy making. So how much of these internal struggles in America are going to have different countries now again looking at nuclear power as an option?
I don't know if it will really translate to nuclear power, because let's talk about Western Europe, for example. So there is a war right now going in Ukraine, Ukraine versus Russia, and there was this hope, you know, even though war does not is not hopeful on most counts, but there was this hope that once the Russian tanks are inside the Ukrainian territory and beyond Donbass, maybe the Europeans will finally begin to spend on their own defense. Now we will see whether they do it or not. But if you look at the all the aid that is flowing to Ukraine, it's mostly from the US. That should not be the concern of the US. And there is some section of academia here which wants to say that it's none of America's business to protect Ukraine, right? If at all, if it is someone's business, then the Western Europe should fund that, should give that aid, and they should take it their own, because we have other challenges in China. So there is one group of people who think that America should prioritize against China. So spending on Ukraine is wasteful because any dollar spent there is less a dollar spent less on China front. Then there's a second group of people who thinks, no, we don't want the global policeman role at all. We want to come back from the Europe, and we want to come back from Asia. We don't have any business protecting either Ukraine or Taiwan. That's also, whether we like it or not, that is also a principled stand. Now the problematic part is the third kind of people who want to spend it on Ukraine but not on Taiwan. Now, this I've been trying to understand why. Maybe because Russia is an easier target and you can do it, and the Chinese are, so that's a very practical thinking, which is also okay. But but it carries its own then. And but there also, there have been instances when, for example, a professor who was trying to ask this question: what is our big stake in Ukraine that we are giving so much aid? And he was attacked so much that he had to leave Twitter for that. So that how can you even ask that when Putin, who is clearly a megalomaniac, is attacking a democratic country? How can you ask that we don't support a democracy? Now that moral questioning in international relations, we try to keep away from these kind of moral questioning, not because we are immoral people, but because we could, for a better view, distance ourselves from these concerns, and then and analyze things unsentimentally. But some of that has, now the boundaries have fused. Everything is being looked at in good and evil terms for some people, not all. I should not paint everybody with the same brush. Problem is the people who feel like that professor who was kicked out either get kicked out or they stop speaking. So there is this issue that America's domestic crisis, internal fracturing of the conversation has stopped. I was yesterday looking at an example. This might be a digression. I was yesterday looking at a video in which Sashi Tharoor and Harsh Madhusoodan were debating with Rajdeep Sardesai. And my thought, and I don't agree with either of those views, but that's another matter. The point is that such a debate, I don't think, is even possible in America today. The conversation has stopped. And if you think you are not on the right side, you either keep quiet or you go to the darker side, which, to be honest, the right Trump is very dark sometimes. The kind of stuff they speak about is just unbelievably bad. like defending gun laws when children get killed is just morally unconscious. Like, what can we? So anyway, so the internal crisis is just affecting American foreign policy in weird ways. And I think the worst way in which this is affecting is the way in which we are not even seeing, because people have stopped speaking, people have stopped asking those questions, criticizing, which they used to do. There's also the sense that if we criticize Biden too much, it will empower Trump back, or something like now, I guess, DeSantis, or the Florida governor, whatever. So the point, but that should never be the concern of an academic. Like our job is not to put our favorite people in presidential palace or prime minister's office. It's our job to analyze things as unsentimentally as we can. But
Yep.
we are not in that world.
I agree with you. We are not in that world, and it's just a damn shame. And as they say, the truth is the victim. The truth
Yes.
dies a million deaths daily under this rubric of tribalism, hyper mobilized through social media idiocy. I don't know what to do. Like, I'm kind of now a past master at pissing so many people off that I have kind of run out of people to piss off to now. So,
Yes, same here.
yeah, what do you do? I mean, you're not gonna, you're not gonna, if you only care about the truth, and it doesn't matter where it falls, you're never going to make people happy. It is what it is. But you know what, I guess this is the perfect way to end the podcast. Kunal,
Somber
once,
way.
yeah, yeah, Kunal, thanks a lot for coming. I wish you all the best in all your future endeavors, and looking forward to many more conversations with you in the future, seeking the truth like we did this time.
Thank you for having me. It was fun, and thanks for everybody who pitched in with questions. Those were great. Thank you.
All right, guys, we'll wrap today's discussion up. Once again, in the description of the podcast, you will see Kunal's Twitter handle. Please go and follow him on Twitter. If you want to support me, well, you know the drill. You can subscribe to the channel. You can like this video. You can leave your comments over there. If you have more questions of Kunal, I guess you can take whatever you have heard over here. You can tweet the questions out to Kunal. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to answer them on social media. If you want to support me, you know the drill. You can support me on YouTube by becoming a member or a subscriber on Patreon or buying the Cārvāka podcast merch or by sending your donations through UPI. I will see you guys next time. Until then, namaste. Take care. Bye bye.